Welcome back to the Dementia Collective. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Glenna Hecht. Glenna is a speaker, author, consultant, and daughter who fought to stay connected when dementia tried to erase her mother. What began as a search for a way to break through confusion became a game, one that opened the door to memory, sparked laughter, and transformed their final years together. With over 3 decades of experience leading people, developing leaders, and building cultures for powerhouse brands like Starbucks, Marshall Fields, and the Levy restaurants at Disney, Glenna has always been fascinated by how human connection can transform outcomes, whether caring for people in a company or caring for a loved one. For the past 15 years, she has led her own firm, Humanistic Consulting, delivering leadership development, training, and HR expertise to organizations across the country. She has worked with more than 70,000 employees, but her most personal and life-changing role was as a caregiver. Her memoir, How Old Are You Today? Dementia, a Mother, a Daughter, and the Game That Transformed Their Lives, blends brutal honesty, vulnerability, hope, and humor to share what it's really like to navigate dementia and how one simple question can keep a relationship alive even as memory fades. Glenna is a 2-time author and a sought-after speaker, and the voice behind What the Hecht blog, where she brings wit and candor to conversations about work, life, and the human side of leadership. She's committed to service and making a difference, volunteering at Dallas theaters, serving on a nonprofit board, and creating the G.J. Hecht Scholarship for Women to Make a Difference. Through her business, she donates proceeds to 13 global charities, and because of her, an impact means giving back. An Indiana University graduate with a degree in communications and a minor in business and opera, yes, she sings, Glenna brings humor, energy, and authenticity to every stage and every page. She lives in Dallas, Texas, with her loyal old dog, Louie, where she continues to write, speak, and support causes close to her heart. Welcome, Glenna. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Of course. So we always start with a Patreon question. So here at the show, we have a Patreon where members of the village who are our supporters are able to ask the guests one question. So I've picked one of the questions from the ones that were submitted to ask you now. You ready?
Go for it.
Okay. So the person says, I worry sometimes that sharing our story would feel like exposing someone who can't fully defend themselves anymore. How did you navigate this?
I'm going to assume that you're talking about the family member that has dementia or Alzheimer's and
I would
talking
assume
about
so.
that. Yeah. Um, I I actually spoke. It's a great question. I spoke with my mom when she could still speak, and it was about a year before she passed away. And we can get to that when the game was nonverbal. But Um, I knew I had found something with this game that was unique, as people were saying, whatever you're doing to help her, it's working. And I asked her permission. So I said to her, we have a unique experience. We found joy in dementia and it repaired a relationship. And this interaction that we have seems to be unique. Is it okay at some point if I decide to write about it or speak about it? And she, of course, was very flattered. But you have to know my mom; she would always, put lipstick on every day, even until she was 99 and a half. So she was thrilled at the idea that I was going to share it. She actually was much more comfortable, Andrew, than I was. And part of the story was not only her experience with dementia, it had to be my experience with dementia, right? And that meant that I had to be really, really willing to be vulnerable and describe the fact that I didn't handle it great all the time. And I had to get comfortable with the idea of sharing that story. So I asked her before if I could tell it, and she said, absolutely, yes.
I think that brings up a secondary point that I hear from caregivers, that sometimes there's these like family secrets, or, this is something we've gone through and she may be okay with it, but we're not on the other side. Maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's somebody else in the family. How would you suggest navigating that, or how did you navigate that? Because sometimes she may be okay with it, but other members of the family that are, let's say stakeholders in this story have trepidation in that?
It's a great question. In some ways, I'm fortunate because I'm an only child. So the good news is I was facing it on my own. The bad news is I was facing it on my own and had a couple of cousins that I would talk through and say, here's what's going on. And I actually refer to them in the book, which I'm very appreciative that they were there and they were supportive. There's a couple of stories that I gulped over when it came time to write them, and I realized that I needed to because they were important to give context to other caregivers. One particularly was when my mom was extremely angry and she got verbally abusive, which was totally unlike anything she was like in her entire life. And I walked into a facility and she was yelling at the top of her lungs and saying things that honestly I had never heard come out of her mouth. And once we calmed her down and I sat with her and gave her some water and I was able to play the game with her, I realized that she was at a point in her life where she had been married to an individual, and he unfortunately had tried to drown her on their honeymoon. And I heard about it once and never heard about it again because she said, I don't want to discuss it. She had gone back to this point in her life, and something about that man triggered her, right? She wasn't angry at me. She wasn't angry at the caregivers. She wasn't angry at the man. She was fighting a memory that she had, and she had slipped into it, which so many dementia and Alzheimer's patients do, right? And um, I really stressed about should I write about it? And then I thought, no, it's extremely important because so many people that have this get angry and the caregiver thinks they're yelling at them, right? They think it's something I did. And this was a situation of realizing that no, it was nothing anyone did. It was something she lived through and she was fighting that memory. But before I did, I asked my family what they thought about me sharing it, and they all agreed that it was a real story, but more than that, that it would resonate with people who deal with that kind of anger, if you will, with their loved ones. So I would just say, before you share it, talk about it with people and take into account what they think and what they may believe and how they may feel about it, and respect everyone's wishes because that's the most important thing. And that's what you did with your loved one who has dementia and Alzheimer's as well.
So you've referenced the game a couple times already. Before we go a little bit further, can you qualify what you mean when you talk about the game?
Absolutely. So I wrote a book, which I know you've had a chance to see, called How Old Are You Today? And that was the end result, if you will, of a game that I developed. It was a verbal dementia relationship game. And it came out of a question that I asked her one day, which was, I forgot, how old are you? And she looked at me and said, yes. And it became this verbal interaction back and forth that was a kind of one off and then eventually became a ritual and a daily game. And I would ask her, how old are you? And based on what I visually saw, I would guess ages. And she would say higher, lower, no, I'm this, no, I'm this. And we would eventually land on her age that day. The game has an art to playing it. The game has rules because there's no consistency, right? One day she's 90, one day she's 30, one day she's 50, one day she's 70. And I would mistake the fact that, if she was a certain age one day, chances are she would be the same the next day. And until I realized that wasn't the case. So the game that I played with her was a verbal interaction game. And I actually wrote about it in my memoir to teach people how to play this game. And that really was something that we did for 7 years until she passed. When she could no longer speak, we played it by asking her to squeeze my hand. And so there's all the outline of what that interaction game is in the book.
What's interesting, Glenn, I know there's one chapter, I think it's chapter 13, I think, so off
Okay.
the top of my head. And you talk about the idea that you started with the game, the narrative of how old are you, and then it leads into the five lessons, the five important lessons. And I thought it was interesting how it goes from this your mom discussing um, how old she was and how old she thought she was, two important lessons you need to understand in life. And I thought it was an interesting narrative. So can you talk about a little bit about that for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So every time I would visit my mom, we would play the game. And that gave me grounding as to where she was chronologically. And then I would ask questions and do things such as that. The chapter you're referring to is the five rules that she lives by. And it was fascinating because I made it a practice of every year. She was the first person that I would go to visit on New Year's. And I'd get up, and sometimes it was 2 or 3 in the morning, but I just wanted to make sure that while she was still alive and that I could visit her, that I was the first face that she saw, and vice versa. So that one particular year, and she was 97 at that point, I went to visit her, and there was one caregiving assistant that was there, and she said, "Just go and see your mom. They're all in there, in bed." And my mom was wrapped in blankets. She kind of looked like a human taco, I think is how I referred to her in the book. And she was all wrapped up. And I said, "Today's New Year's. Do you have any resolutions?" And she looked at me in one of those days where she was communicating very clearly, though not at her age, but she was at another age, but she was very able to talk. And she said to me, "I have 5 rules that I live by." Andrew, just imagine, in my entire life, I had never heard of these 5 rules. It was completely shocking to me. And I said, "What are they?" And, as she's saying them, I grabbed a pen and I start writing on my hand because I had never heard them before. And she said, "Here are my 5 rules that I've lived by, and they give me a good life." And it is, live every day, love every day, learn something new every day, say I love you every day, and be grateful for what you have. And what was so amazing about that experience was once she passed away, which was 19 days shy of 100 years old. So she lived a very long life. Um, at her celebration of life, I made up cards that had the 5 rules that she lived by. And people were taking handfuls of them because they said, "We don't know people that are living this long. And if she did this, then maybe that's why she lived such a long and good life." And I believe that. And so I try to do that every day, not only to honor her, but to really live a full life. Because when you think of those lessons, they're important.
If she never brought it up any other day in her life, do you think that she really understood that and made a deliberate effort and deliberate thought, like these are the five things for her life? Or do you think it was a retrospection saying that in hindsight, this is what I was aspiring to and this is what I acted towards?
What a great question. Um, uh, what I think was that she was in a moment in her life and an age in her life where those were the things that were driving her. Um, I learned over time when I played the game, because I made a lot of mistakes when I played the game, um, that she wasn't necessarily capable of what I would call strategic thought, if that makes any sense. So I would ask yes, no questions, and I would get responses to that. I would say, "Okay, where are you? Describe this. Tell me about that." So if I said to her, "What do you think about something?" I would notice that her eyes went back and forth, and it was almost like a microcomputer. Do you know what I mean? Trying to find the file. And sometimes she couldn't find it. So it told me that that kind of new thinking, if you will, or opinionated or strategic thinking was not something that she was either capable or comfortable with. So I kind of took it all on face value, if you will. And the fact that she said it, it came from someplace in her life based on the age that she was at, and that was how she was choosing to live her life. Um, she may have forgotten it. She may have thought I've internalized it, which is why I didn't hear it for other years. But when we landed on an age, I could ask her a lot of the yes nos about that age, and she would reply almost immediately. So it was fascinating what I learned that I never knew before, and it was just a matter of going on the time travel with her.
So we always start the show, Glenna, with a bit of an origin story. We kind of got down a road there. I think it's a good one. But can we take a step back and talk about what your experience was growing up? Like, what was your profession? Um, did you have any experience kind of navigating aging and Alzheimer's in advance of your mother? These sort of discussions. Can you talk about it with us, please?
Absolutely. We did kind of get ahead of ourselves there for just a
It's all
minute.
right. It's all right.
No, it's great. Thank you. I grew up in a suburb of Chicago, only child. My parents were quite a bit older, so my folks were 39 and 41 when I was born, which was fashionably early for that. And I grew up spending an awful lot of time in the theater, performing, did that professionally. And no surprise when it came time for me to go to college. I majored in communications, and human interaction for me was always something that I gravitated towards. And I went into HR and training and development for some very, very large companies. So the majority of my career, I've been leading human resources and training for some huge organizations, and was VP of HR for a number of companies. I'd never been around aging, dementia, Alzheimer's. It was not a part of my life. Older grandmother who was over 100, but was, with it in terms of memory and never had any issues such as that. We had other things in our family. So, cancer or, issues such as that, but never anything having to do with memory care or, people that were impacted by that at all. So, what was fascinating about my experience, fascinating and challenging actually, Andrew, was that I had gone into some great companies. I had half the country for Starbucks that I was handling a human resources. I'd worked for Disney. I just had a wonderful career, and I found that over a period of time, my mom and I started to have a very challenging relationship. When I look back on it, it was probably her aging, some female issues, but also the beginning of dementia. And she became very, very critical of me. And so the way that we chose to deal with it was that I left Chicago and moved away. And that
And
was
she was still
how,
living in Chicago at that point?
yep. And that was how we had peace with each other. And so I would call the relationship estranged. I came to Dallas to head up HR for a company. Had a wonderful career, and I was in my last corporate role, which is where the book actually starts. VP of HR and administration for a company that did advertising and marketing, very well known organization. And sitting one day and getting a call that my mom had gone missing in Chicago. And here I was with this two-pronged issue that I think so many people deal with, and that is I have a parent who is ill and needs my help, and oh, by the way, I have a job that I need to take care of, and you're trying to, in one moment, decide, what do I do with my life? And I went into my boss and I said, my mom's missing. She's wandering the streets of Chicago. I have to go. And if you need to replace me in my role, I'll understand. But I only have one mom. So I need to go back. And she doesn't have any other family other than me. And that was the beginning of the story. And it was fascinating because over the first 3 months that she had dementia and was diagnosed with it, I moved her 3 different times. Once into assisted living in Chicago. She became a flight risk, ran out the front door to try and walk to her house 20 miles away. And it became clear that because of the level of interaction that I had to have, I needed to move her to Dallas, which was the second move. And again, I moved her into a facility where she ran out the front door. And they said, your mom is a flight risk. She needs to be in a memory care lockdown unit. And the third move I made was to exactly that. So going from a corporate job and now having a new title of caregiver, right? Which is VP of HR and training and caregiver. And so was balancing those two, no handbook, no rule book, no job description, just figuring it out as you go along, which I think most of your listeners probably dealt with or deal with. And I will tell you, the first 2 years that she was in Dallas with me, I resorted to how I handled my role in companies. As a head of HR, you solve problems, you fix pay issues, you fix all kinds of benefit plans, you deal with challenging employees. And so all of the issues that would come up in a company, the most challenging landed on my desk, and I was a fixer. So I thought I could fix her. And that didn't work very well when you realize that you don't fix dementia, you face dementia. And that's what I learned I had to do. So, hope that answers the question.
So when you were caring for your mother and you had to make that choice and said, replace me or whatever, did you move back to Chicago while you were caring for her? Or did you bring her to Dallas? Or was it a hybrid approach?
It was hybrid in the beginning because we were estranged. I thought, okay, well, this, I don't get what this dementia thing's all about, but I'll put her someplace where she'll be safe and I'll come and visit her, I don't know, a couple times a year, and that was truly what I thought I could do. Now, that's very naive because I didn't understand what the disease was. I didn't understand what the requirements of it were. I didn't understand the heavy lifting a caregiver has to do. I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so I thought that she'd be okay in this great place in Chicago and I'd be okay in my place in Dallas and resume my life. That quickly became um, it just quickly became unreasonable because every day I would get a call and it would be, your mom needs this. Your mom tried to run away. Your mom won't eat this. Your mom is doing this. Can you get this? And the answer was I had to do those things. So I kept going back into Chicago and finally realized I had to move to Dallas to be near me. And so that happened 6 weeks after she was originally diagnosed and moved into her first facility. So, hybrid for this much time, Andrew, and then she needed to be close. And I think that's something that caregivers don't often understand. And it's not because they're not caring people, it's because we don't really know what it means, right? We don't know what we're doing. And there's a little bit of naivete thinking that somebody else can help you carry the load and that you don't necessarily have to do that. And that was the way I approached it until I realized that it was my responsibility and I needed to bring her here, and what became a responsibility in the beginning became a total and complete joy and love story very shortly after she got here. Um, because it was such a gift to be able to learn about her history and how she felt about me and to be a part of it with her. It healed both of us. So it went from an estranged relationship to an absolute love story. I can't describe it any other way than that.
So when you're saying gift, you're saying because you were able to um, fix this strained relationship. That's the qualification how you're defining gift.
A little more complicated than that. That's a part of it. The gift was absolutely that I fixed a relationship. And I would say when she passed away, there was nothing left unsaid, which a lot of people don't have that opportunity to say. And so it was just joyous in that regard. The other reason that it was a gift was because once I was able to find out about the game and play it regularly, I learned things about her and her life, but her life with me that told me how precious I was to her. And I never knew that in a way that was present. I always had heard about it historically the way we all do, right? So there's one chapter in the book, I'll just share it with you, and then I think it'll give you a lot of context. That's called When I Met Me. And you may recall this chapter, but she was in a nursing home. So she actually made 5 moves during the 9 years that she had dementia. And the final one was a nursing home because we had run out of money and so needed to do that to take care of her. And I was there all the time. So whenever I would go to visit her, there was always a chair available. And I walked in one day and she was sitting like this, and she was rocking a baby, right? And every once in a while she would do this. And I went to sit down with her and went, this is going to be a very interesting day for sure. And as I played the game with her, she was 39 years old, which was the year that she had me. And I asked her questions about, you know, you're a mother. Do you have a baby? Is the baby a boy? No. What's the baby's name? We call the baby the miracle baby. And when I heard that, I knew she was talking about me. My mom had had a number of miscarriages before I was born, and they were thrilled and blessed to have me. And so we were a little unit. My mom, dad, and myself were together all the time because they just were thrilled to be with me. And I was likewise. And so I remembered saying to her, tell me about having the baby. Um, did it hurt to have the baby? What was it like? And she screams at the top of her lungs, it hurt. And everybody in the dining room froze. And I looked at them and I went, no, it's okay. And then I said, what's it like? Do you love the baby? Yes. Do you care for the baby? Yes. What do you do with the baby? And she would say to me, as she's this the entire time, I feed the baby, I change the baby, I bathe the baby, I sing to the baby. And it was so loving. And then I said to her, do you get much rest? And she said, no, if I go to sleep, I'm afraid the baby's going to die. And that was her history because of what had happened to her previously. And in that moment, you can only imagine you're an adult watching your mom holding an imaginary you who thinks you're going to die. And I I was quiet, thinking in my head and praying that I would come up with the right words. And I said to her, I've seen the baby and she's healthy and she's beautiful. You were a great mom. And my mom kind of did one of like these and she smiled and she patted the baby again. And then in that moment, Andrew, the energy just pooled out of her and it was almost as though you could see a puddle on the floor. And she said, "Oh, I'm so glad. Can I go to bed now?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I signaled for the caregivers to come over and wheel her away and sat there for 10 or so minutes and just I could feel that my body was tingling. It was so unbelievable. And then I got up and walked out of the facility towards my car. And it was as though you can appreciate this. The colors were more vivid, the sounds were louder, everything just became so magnified. And I sat in my car for about an hour and cried. Just bawled my eyes out because I never knew that that was how she felt about me. And I never knew she went through that. And so when I say gift, that's what I mean is that learning those things about a parent is truly a gift. Most of the times you ask your mom, what was it like when you gave birth to me? And she'll say, oh, I was in labor for 14 hours and they gave me, a pill. And so you hear about it as a memory. You don't hear about it as being right there when it happens. And there are so many of those stories that I could share, and it was really a wonderfully rich experience. That was the gift that was given to me.
Do you think it's a hindsight thing? Um, the fact that you're now looking in retrospection and say it was a gift seeing these things, but in the moment it was heavier than that. Do you feel like the two are different depending on the lens and time in which you're looking at it?
They weren't, at least not for me. And as I've taught the game to others, I've heard similar responses from them. Um, Even though some of the things that I heard were difficult to hear, I viewed it all as being a gift, because I learned something about somebody I loved that I didn't know before. And, what we have left in our hearts when somebody leaves us are the memories that we carry, right? And she expanded those memories. And I've often said that her dementia was one of the greatest gifts that I ever received, which is not what you typically hear a caregiver say, really. It's very, very difficult. And it was for me as well. But in the moment, even when it was sad, I felt grateful that I had that experience. And wrote them and kept track of them. And as I looked back, that was what became clear to me I needed to write a book about were all of those experiences. But how do you get them? And how do you go there to play a game and be present for somebody that is moving all the time, all over the course of their life? So retrospect and what happened in the moment were always very similar for me.
Given the fact that you were essentially half a country away from your mom as she was going through the early stages of this, were you able to, or did you notice any things and changes in her trajectory in the at a distance?
Well, she was only at a distance for 6 weeks. So of the 9
But before
years.
she was diagnosed and before she went
Oh,
missing?
yeah, you know what's interesting? It's interesting you say that, Andrew. So, um, because I didn't know what dementia was, right? And I didn't necessarily have the skill and ability to be in a situation and recognize it was the stages of what was going on in that. Had I known more about the disease, I could have gone, "Oh, okay, now I get it. Now I see what's happening." I remember times when the building that she lived in, the building manager would call me and say, "Your mom just came in and she thinks someone came in her apartment, stole a cake." And I'd be like, "That's very odd." And so I'd call my mom and I would say, "Did somebody come in your apartment to take a piece of cake? Did you offer it to them?" And she'd be, "Hmm, let me think about that." She'd be like, "No, I ate the cake." You know what I mean? So though when those happened repeatedly, had I had an understanding of what dementia was, then I could have said, "Oh, okay, I get this, right? She's starting down this path." Even when I flew into Chicago and she had gone missing and we brought her to the hospital, the doctor said, "I think your mom has dementia." I didn't know what that meant. And so I actually had to say to the doctor, I'm not really familiar with that. Can you describe it to me and tell me what you're saying?" And he gave me kind of a clinical definition. And then he said to me, "Let me break it down for you." Um, it was just my naivete and inexperience, not knowing what I was looking for. And had I had more understanding of that, I probably would have been able to identify it maybe 12 to 14 months before I actually had to go into Chicago and figure out what was going on.
Hmm. So, shifting to your book, for the folks that haven't encountered it or read it, can you talk about what it is at its core?
Yeah, absolutely. The book is titled "How Old Are You Today?" and it's dementia, a mother, a daughter, and the game that transformed their lives. So I would describe it as a memoir. It's my memoir. It's my story, and it starts with getting the phone call that mom was missing. And really, at the core of the game is what I went through as a caregiver, the good, the bad, and the ugly of things that I experienced, and then how I found the game. And it is really about the art of the game, the rules of the game, and then the stories and the situations I experienced going forward up until the point when she passed away. And so the core really of it is a teaching memoir so that people that read this book can walk away with something they can try that would be a relationship game for them to play with their loved one, their neighbor, their parent, their partner. And that was very important to me that folks had something that they could use and try. And it's so interesting, Andrew, because people will say to me, "What if I try the game and it doesn't work?" And I said, "What if you try the game and it does?" That you need to just try because the circumstances with our family members, our loved ones, changes day to day to day to day. And so who you found yesterday may not be who you deal with today. And that's very important.
How did you come up with it?
So let me rewind just a wee bit. And that is, I mentioned I tried everything to fix her because of my history. I went to symposia, did research, support groups, and nothing taught me how to deal with my mom who had dementia. And when I mean deal with her was how do I relate to her? How do I have conversations with her? What do I do when she is jumping around and being different people at different places? How do I handle when I'm afraid? And I never got those answers. I even went so far as to become a certified assisted living manager because I thought that would tell me, yeah, that would tell me how to be calm and how to interact. And it really didn't. It taught me things like how do you run human resources in a senior care facility, or how far off the ground should you have a fire extinguisher. But it didn't really teach me how do I relate to this person. So I spent 2 years trying to fix her, and then one day went in to see her, and she was stuck in a loop and had repeated the same story 6 times. And I lost my cool and really lost it and said, "I heard you." And nobody responded to the fact that I didn't handle my interaction with her very well. And I was mortified by it. And I left the assisted living and went home and was so embarrassed by my behavior, not only as a caregiver, but as her daughter, that I crawled into a closet and cried and just said, there has to be another way. And I woke up, and the words in my head that kept repeating over and over and over and over again were to be quiet, observe, watch, and travel over and over again. And I said, you know what? If all I do is to be present and be with her and be loving and hold her hand, then that's what I'm going to do. So about a year later, I walked into the facility and I sat with my mom, and we would always hold hands and just enjoy each other. And she looked up at the ceiling. Imagine a wood paneled room with saggy couches and linoleum floors and fluorescent lights. And she looks up at the ceiling and says, "I love the sun. I love my toes in the sand and listening to the water and looking at the boys on the beach." And she was with her sorority sister. And I was flabbergasted and actually thought, it was the tunnel. I thought that it was the thing you go through before you pass away, right? And she was, dying. And actually, she was so joyous and so full of life. It was opposite of what I had witnessed before. And I said, I'm going to get back to that beach on every other visit. So I would go the next one and say, are you at the beach? And she said, no. Okay. Are you with your sorority sister, Amy? No. Are you feeling the sun? No. And after 3 or 4 times, I went, okay, the beach is where I want her to go. It's not where she wants to go. And when I gave it up and I went in the next time and said, I forgot how old you were. And she said, guess that was the beginning. And I would say, okay. And I would watch her and I would think, you look like you're a little younger today than your actual years. I go, are you 60? And sometimes she'd say no. And I go, are you older? And she'd say yes. Or sometimes if I said, are you 60? She would get very offended because she was younger than that day. And we would go back and forth until I landed on her age. And that was how we played the game.
One thing you mentioned earlier on it, I don't know if you necessarily noticed it, but you mentioned you went to get a certified assisted living manager title and or designation, and it was specifically focused on the um let's say the requirements, the legal foundations, which is very much in line with a career in HR. But it's interesting systematically that these individuals that we hire to look after our loved one, and we have training to help, we would think, to get you into the appropriate support, is actually not teaching you how to support these people. It's how to navigate a regulatory body. So it's interesting that those systems are in place that you would think would want to get people to care better, but instead they're getting them to avoid problems.
Know if it's true everywhere. I know that that was true of what I went through. You know what I mean? That it was much more about how do you manage a facility? How do you manage a team? How do you manage that part of it? So it was really the more business certification kind of approach. But I know even beyond that, Andrew, that doctors will say, meet them where they are. How many people that are listening have heard that? But there's not necessarily a methodology to say, how do I do that? So the caregiver may learn the mechanics, and I'm sure they do. How do you, uh, you know, how do you move somebody from one point place to the next? What do you do if they're acting a certain way? But in terms of a game, such as what I found, there didn't appear to be anything like that in the certification that I went through. There's actually even a chapter at the end of the book, you may remember having read it, where I have caregivers that have asked me questions. And one of them, particularly, which I thought was a hilarious story, was she said to me, we have a woman living in an assisted living facility who is extremely difficult. And I said, what does she do? And she said, well, when people go into her room to make up her bed, she'll grab the sheets and she'll yank them off the bed and say, you're not doing it right. And she'll throw the sheets on the ground. And she might do it 3 or 4 times. So the people that were caring for her in her room hated going in there. Well, of course, because it slowed them down. It wasn't a gracious interaction. And she said, I just don't know how to handle this. I go, are you willing to try something a little unusual? And this woman said, I'll try anything. So I shared how to play the game and we practiced doing it. And she wrote me a note and said, you're never going to believe this. The woman that was ripping the sheets off of her bed used to manage housekeeping for a hotel. And part of her job was to teach people how to make the bed and make the room look right. And until they could make a bed, they didn't pass their training. So was stuck in a loop at that point where she was saying, I think I'm heading up housekeeping for whatever hotel and you're not doing it right. And so I'm going to keep correcting you until you get it. And once that caregiver found out, she was able to explain to people, here's what's going on. And they turned it into a game. So they had fun with it, which was, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. The guest is not going to be happy. What should I be doing instead? And so it became a different kind of interaction versus here's a person living in the facility who's just really difficult.
Did the act of writing itself change how you processed what happened over those years caring for your mom?
Oh, absolutely. Um, it took me 11 years to write the book. And folks will say, why did it take so long? So I started writing it when my mom was still alive. And as I always say, I knew how it would end. I just didn't know how it would end with her. And so wanted to wait. And then when she passed away, I took a couple of years um, just sitting with it. And at that point, I was grieving and I wanted to kind of feel through what was happening. And then I sat down to write the book and wrote a lot of the stories and the chapters, but it wasn't meaningful enough for me. And I finally put it aside and I said to myself, why is this not right? And there was something missing, Andrew, that was really important. And what I realized was I had to become the person who could write this book. I had to become the person who was willing to be vulnerable on paper. I had to be willing to say I crawled in a closet and cried. I had to be willing to say I yelled at my mom because being a caregiver is really, really hard. And you don't get it right. You do things you wish you wouldn't do. You lose your temper. You make mistakes. You think you have it down, and then the next day something new happens. And I started writing the book when I wanted it to look like I knew what I was doing and realized not only was that not the real story, it was making light of the caregiving situation. It was by far and is the hardest job I ever had. No kidding. And I've had some hard jobs in big companies, but this was the one that for me was really tough because not only are you trying to make their life easier, you're dealing with the fact that someone you love is going through something that you can't stop. And that was really hard. It was really gut wrenching. And so, yeah, I had to be willing to put on paper that aspect of how I handled my life. And once I did, I could feel just my heart was cracking open for sure, but it was it was such a wonderful, vulnerable, honest feeling, and it made me feel as though I was being respectful to other people who are handling the same thing that we went through.
So, how did your background in HR influence how you were a caregiver?
In the beginning, not as well because I tried to fix everything as I do, and I have my own consulting business. So people bring me into companies to help them fix things. And so the fixer in me is very natural. And I realized that that was what I started doing. What I relied on for the next 7 years of time that she had dementia, and I would say was what made me really successful is the other part of what I do is training and speaking. And in order to be a great trainer and a speaker and a professional, you have to not only learn how to be observant, you have to learn how to listen. And so for 7 years, that's what I relied upon was watching how she behaved because that that is one of the rules of the game, actually, is by watching her face, her eyes, her body, I could guess where she might be in her life. And that was the start of us interacting each day with the game. By listening to her stories, I could ask questions that would continue and ensure that it wasn't just one or two questions, that it was a whole dialogue about what she was experiencing at that time. So I would say, as in most professions, being observant, learning from your situation and listening to what people are saying has you be successful in any profession. And that was what had me be successful with her dementia as well.
Was there anything that dementia taught you that your decades of experience in business never did?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind immediately for me, great question, um, is that you don't always have the whole story. So when I was in that experience of my mom, doing this to me as a baby, um, imagine being at a point in your life when you learn something about how your mom cared for you or your parents cared for you that you didn't know. And it made me realize how fortunate I was that I was able to learn something that I never knew before. But I also think that what it taught me, I know what it taught me, was that you don't always have 100% of the story, that you have to be willing to be quiet and observe and listen and watch so that you are respecting the other person that you're dealing with and you're sharing with him or her that I'm an open space for you to be who you are. And that was exactly what I did for my mom. So I would say, in a company, in an organizational standpoint, sometimes it's find the facts, boom, boom, boom. And this opened me in some ways that I probably didn't practice 100% of the time before.
Do you think workplaces are prepared for the influx of employees that are caregiving, that are taking on this burden, that now are living these two lives?
Uh, Funny you should say that. I wrote a blog that probably 2 or 3 weeks ago on this topic, and I've also have presentations that I put together on this topic. And the short answer to your question is no, they are not prepared. And a lot of folks think it's the HR person's role to figure that out or to know that. It is, but we don't even always hear about it. And so the line manager, a person's manager, has to be willing to have a conversation when things start looking as though they're changing. I'll give you an example of that. So, the employee who starts to use all their PTO to deal with a family issue, right? Um, they are taking off early or coming in late because they have to take someone to the doctor, or they look like they are exhausted and they're dealing with something, to not assume that it's always job related. It could be very much related to their family or situations, not only dementia, Alzheimer's, it could be special needs, it could be dealing with a parent with cancer or a partner or whatever. And being willing to sit down with somebody and say, hey, what's going on with you? It appears as though, you know, you're not yourself. Is there anything that I can do for you? Is there anything that you can tell me? And I think organizations, the more they do leadership training, the more they coach their managers on how to have tough conversations and be aware and be observant, will highlight for them things that are going on that they can then deal with. I have a client that I spoke with a couple of weeks ago, and just imagine they had a 20-something-year-old manager who had both parents dealing with dementia, 20, and both parents dealing with dementia. And this person said, I need to leave and go back to California for a period of time. And this person, very valuable employee. And I said to the head of operations, "What did you do?" And they said, "We told her to take her time. We said, if you're out for a long period of time and you want to come back, we'll bridge your service. We'll find a role. We'll pay you what you were making before." Because he said, we didn't want to lose her and we knew what she was going through was her priority. That's the right way to deal with it. I also said to him, "What is it that you wish you would have done differently?" And he said the lag time between the manager finding out about it and being willing to be vulnerable to tell me was a couple of weeks, and I wish it wouldn't have been that. So, finding how do you have the systems in place and the interactions in place so there's a listening and an opportunity to work with people to have them deal with real life because they will. And rather than having them quit or leave or, you know, do the things that you hope that they don't have to do, is all about how the company is prepared and willing to deal with those situations. So, to answer your questions, I don't think we're prepared. And I think that um, HR people bear a lot of that burden and they need to teach in the company and train people how to start having listening for caregiving, whatever type it is.
Looking at the book and since its release, what surprised you most about the response from readers?
Well, gosh, it's a very humbling experience, that's for sure. I've done book clubs. I have a tremendous amount of positive feedback that has come back and through reviews, and people have said it is it's exactly what I needed. I tried it and it worked. It gave me moments of hope and joy and peace, and that makes me happy and emotional and teary eyed and everything that you would imagine. It's just, it's really humbling and it's really gratifying because um, I feel as though I'm in service to people that are living what I have lived. And if I can pave the way for somebody to do this more joyously in their life, that's what I'm all about. I think I mentioned to you, Andrew, that I have a really big goal and it's a little overwhelming, but it's very important. And that is to get this book into the hands of hundreds of thousands of people and to donate $2 million to dementia Alzheimer's research. And I know I can do it. And I know I'm committed to doing it. So, all of the reviews and all of the feedback keeps that momentum going, but also that it's giving people a pathway to be able to have more joyous relationships with their loved ones just makes me so proud. So,
What do you hope someone takes away from reading the book specifically?
that there's something they can try, that they have a tool that they can use, that there is hope. Um, I don't think my story is unique. I've shared the game with others and they've had similar experiences, and that it doesn't have to be the heartbreak that it is there's another option that you can try. And I know that caregivers look for any tool that they can use in their toolbox of how do I deal with a person that has dementia or Alzheimer's. And this is just another tool, and I hope it's one that works for them and they're willing to try it.
Well, Glenna, it's time for lightning round.
Oh, here we go.
You ready?
Yeah,
Coffee or tea?
coffee for sure.
Decaf or calf?
Calf.
Oh, everyone says that.
High octane.
I used to work at a place and they the coffee was so caffeinated that it was from whatever place they were, but the coffee name, got this tip there's names of all different kinds of coffee. It was called jet fuel. because it was
Yeah.
so highly caffeinated. It would burn. It was, oh boy, it was rough.
Wow. Wow. You're fully caffeinated. Love it.
Morning person or night owl?
Morning person. I'm usually up at 3:30 in the morning. Yeah, I know. Writing and reading and doing things like that. It's kind of scary.
Wow. What's one small ritual you've kept from your time caregiving?
The 5 rules that my mom lived by, and the one that I journal about every day is the last rule, which was be grateful for what you have. And I write down every day what that looks like. And some days are easier than others, as you all know, but it's a ritual that I hold on to every day.
What's one lesson dementia taught you that business never could?
That there's hope even in the darkest times.
What's one moment with your mom that still catches you off guard when you think about it?
So many. Um, there's there's the baby and living in that experience, and probably the times when she made me laugh so hard that I cried because some of what occurred during dementia was just hilarious.
What's one myth about dementia that frustrates you?
I think a lot of um, people think there's nobody in there and that they don't necessarily know what's going on. They do. And I believe that as they travel, time travel, they know exactly where they are at that point in time and relive it. So they're not lost. They're just in a different space, and you have to be willing to find it.
What's one boundary in caregiving you had to learn the hard way?
Mm. Um, eh, the boundary was to not assume that they were always in the same place, so the boundary was not picking up where I left off, it was starting at the beginning and playing the game at the very beginning, and they were always in a different space.
What's one sentence people say about dementia that makes you cringe?
Um, it's when hey, thank you for making me think about this. It's when they talk about the caregiver talks about their experience and realizes that doesn't realize that they're the one that doesn't have the disease. I always say, it's not about you, you're experiencing it, but you can go out and have a pizza or a cocktail, and they're the person that's living with dementia and will live with it for the rest of their life. So I would say making it about you instead of about the person that's actually facing it.
What's one quality from your mom that still shows up in you now more than ever?
Um, one quality, there's two. One is humor. She was hilarious and she would say funny things all the time. But the other one was living the 5 lessons. And that I can look back at the story she told me and realize where they came from and how she was living. And that has really shifted my life as well.
What's one everyday habit that keeps you human when things get hard and heavy?
Um, it's it's number one realizing that I'm human and that I'm not perfect and that nobody is and that we all approach it our own way. And that there's so much to be grateful for. And one of the lessons that is part of the 5 is to learn something new every day. And that is really an important thing that has stuck with me, and that can be about how I behave, how I show up, something I wouldn't want to do again. And so that's really grounded me as well.
What is the most human thing that's happened to you lately?
Hmm. It's it's going right, well, for sure, writing this book and putting it out there and being vulnerable with your story, but having people say that it's made a difference in their lives, and I can just feel my heart, opening up, and and being very, very grateful for that. I'll share with you something that happened last week that really reaffirmed this for me, and I think you'll appreciate it, Andrew. Is that I'm speaking on this to different groups. And of course, I have a presentation, and then I'm opening it up to questions. And I was just in an organization last week and had about 40 minutes of questions, and almost all of them were asked by men. And typically, you find that a lot of women are more prone to the caregiving role, but men are dealing with it with spouses and parents and all of that. And they were so grateful and so vulnerable with what was going on with them, and just asked such thought-provoking questions, and were thankful that they felt like they had some direction. And I was just so proud of the fact that I could help give that to them.
What's one TV show that helps you shut off your mind?
Gosh, I binge on Netflix all the time. um, I would say, I'm embarrassed to say this, Bridgerton?
Never
So,
seen it? Okay.
I watched that. Um, what else do I watch? Let's see. Usually a lot of things on Netflix that, you'll go, "Okay, I need to escape from the world a little bit and watch something that is joyous and interesting and beautiful." So that's what I try to do.
What smell brings you back to your childhood?
Um, it brings me back to my childhood and to my mother. Um, and this is actually so interesting. So lemon, but I'll share with you why. So mom used to put lemon rinds in the sink, you know what I mean, to make it smell good. Don't ask. And when she was about 90, probably 98 years old, I poured some oil in the palm of her hand that was lemon. And she went and she smelled it and she said, "It smells like sunshine." So maybe that's what those lemon rinds meant to her, but it's the smell of lemon.
Hmm. What's one word that describes this season of your life now?
Grateful.
If your mom could read the book and give you one sentence of feedback, what do you think she'd say?
She'd say, "You nailed it, girlfriend." Uh, she would say, "I'm really proud of you and what you've done."
And this doesn't have to be a sentence, but what gives you hope?
About this topic or topics in general, what gives me hope is that there are people like you, Andrew, who are willing to talk about this and to give opportunities for people to learn and grow and to make life easier for themselves and for other people. And what gives me hope is that folks are now, I think, more willing to share their stories than ever before.
Glenna, I always give the guests one opportunity to um, have the last word and then say whatever they want to the audience. The floor is yours.
Well, for the caregivers that are out there, I want to say thank you. You are my heroes. It is truly the hardest job that I've ever had, and I know probably same for you. and that I hope you pick up the How Old Are You Today book and that you try the game over and over and over again, and that it gives you love and joy and peace through this time. So, thank you.
Amazing. Well, Glenna, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you coming here and talking and being vulnerable. It
Thank
it
you.
made a big difference. I think it's gonna make a difference on our caregivers. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for being here as well. Make sure to follow the Dementia Collective wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, share this episode with someone who you think might benefit. And if you'd like to help us grow this movement, please consider becoming a member of the Village on Patreon. Among the benefits, like the ability to ask questions to our guests, you get early access to every episode, plus the satisfaction of helping powerful voices like Glenna's reach more caregivers around the world. And finally, if you're on your own caregiving journey, remember, you are not alone. We're here at BlueBell to help connect you with the supports and resources that truly fit your family's unique and individual needs. Until next time, don't forget, you are strong, you are not alone, and you're doing something that matters more than you know. Till next time.